Hey, Sierra, can you hear me? I always like to test my mic first.
Yeah, I can hear you perfect.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 2, the Literature Review. We have a co-host on, Sierra, and she's going to be providing some helpful links to you about where we archive the webinars. So you can go to our website and access it there, as well as other webinars. You all also get a copy of the webinar too sent to you in your email. And Sierra can answer any questions for you that are non-content related, that are more technical in nature, if you're having issues there. Okay, so let's get started. This is on the literature review, which is typically the chapter 2. Our model is based on the social sciences 5-chapter dissertation model, where chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 is the literature review, chapter 3 is the methodology, chapter 4 is the results, and chapter 5 is the discussion of the results. There are other models, but that model is fairly typical. Okay, so let's get started. Here are the areas we'll be covering today. Oh, and just to rewind real quick point. If you have questions as we go along, completely fine. If you want to type them into either the chat box or the question and answer box as we're moving along, feel free to do that so you don't forget them. But I'll get to them at the end. I'm not going to stop and answer questions in the middle. I'll handle them all at the end. But again, feel free to type them in early if you want, so you don't forget. Okay. So the literature review. It's helpful to talk a little bit about the purpose of the literature review, because it helps us understand. Understanding the purpose helps us understand what should go in the lit review. It's a challenging chapter. There's no doubt about that, because it tends to be long. And how long, that may depend on what your school wants per their template or guidelines. But it's usually long because it involves you reviewing and discussing, previous research on your topic. So sometimes there's a lot of research, and hence a lot of material to cover, and so a lot of content for the chapter. So it's challenging in a couple ways, because it tends to be long, and because you're dealing with a lot of source material, right? A lot of research that you have to cover. So it tends to be long. But how long? Again, you're going to hear me say this several times throughout the presentation, the webinar. Always get a hold of your school's template. Okay, your school's, how do I make that go away? Okay, always got to hold it. Let me see, just a sec here. I got a view off. How do I move this? Okay. That. Sorry, I'll move that over here. All right. So, how long does the chapter 2 need to be? If your school's template says it gives you a length requirement, obviously then follow that. I've seen 10-page lit reviews. I've seen 80-page lit reviews. I've seen everything in between. Usually the sweet spot is about 20 to 30 pages, 25 to 30 pages. But again, they can be a little shorter, they can be a little longer. But always follow your school's template. If your school template doesn't give you a length, maybe ask your chair or look at some sample dissertations from your school to see about how long they are, to give you an idea. But again, the sweet spot seems to me to be about 25 to 30 pages, give or take. Okay. So again, that's part of the reason why they're challenging. They usually involve a lot of material. They're usually kind of lengthy. Okay, so the introduction, literature search strategy, theoretical framework, review of the literature, which is about 80 to 85% of the lit review, and a summary. Okay. And again, these always follow your school specific template. This is going to be a good kind of general template, which you could use if your school doesn't have one. So the introduction section, you're basically just reorient. You don't need to overdo this section. Some people do. It's really, you're just reorienting your reader, right? So restate the purpose of your study. Remind the reader of the importance or the need for your study or the research problem. And if you want, you can preview contents of the chapter or sections of the chapter that you're going to cover. And that doesn't take too long, maybe a page, less than a page, a couple of paragraphs, a solid paragraph. Again, the idea is just to kind of, reorient the reader to your study and what you're doing and where you're going. Okay. Again, check your template, but most of them have something like this called the literature search strategy or methods of searching. And what the section contains is a description of how you look for research, right? How you use your academic library to search for the material that is in your lit review. Because what you want to show your reader and your professors is that you conducted a fairly comprehensive search of the literature. So you cast a pretty wide net and a solid net where things didn't get through, you didn't miss stuff. So you can say make claims about the research with some certainty, right? That you've covered you've covered it, right? And so they want a description to see the methods that you use and the strategies that you used to search for literature. So usually, you just start off with, I used my school library, name your school, Walden University, whatever it is, online library portal to access, materials that I found for this literature review. You want to use, you want to list the databases that you searched. You want to list any search tools that you used. Databases are, if you're in education, say, there's specialized databases for education. One of them is called ERIC, E-R-I-C. There are other search tools like Google Scholar, Academic Search Complete, Academic Search Premier. These are like, they're search tools in the sense that they search multiple databases for you, like Google Scholar does. And they're really helpful because they have a broad, they have a really broad scope. So anything like that you use, you want to list. Sometimes your chair might want you to search specific journals because there are specific journals that are really relevant to your discipline. Any specialized journals that you search, you want to include that. And it's important to include your search terms, right? There's terms that you use to search for the material. And this isn't going to be any surprise, right? These correspond to your variables in your study, your factors, any major ideas, major concepts associated with your study, any theories that you're using for your theoretical foundation. That would be your search terms. So you want to list those. And here's an important, I'm going to pull up an example here in a minute after we get done with this slide, just to let you see an example of an academic, search page for an academic library. This last square here is important. Include any way that you filtered or qualified your search. So after you do that, you talk about the library you used or the portal that you used, databases, search tools, search terms. It's important to talk about any kind of way you qualified your search. So some more common ones are maybe you just searched English only, just return articles to me that are in English. That's pretty common. Maybe full text, you just want full text one, but these last two are more important. Date of publication. And this gets to a bigger question of, can you include older studies in your lit review? And this is really school dependent. And again, you can hear me say a couple times, check your school's template. So I know some schools are really strict about you can't review things, articles, past 5 years. Some of it's like 3 to 5 years, so they want stuff really recent, unless it's really foundational or seminal. So they predominantly want you to use, more recent material within 5 years or so. Some schools it's 10 years. Some schools don't give you a time frame, so you can include anything. But if your school does have that requirement, it's important that you put in there, if they only want you to search things 5 years back, that you qualified your search and you primarily only included things from, would that be 2017 and up. And the last one is real important too. Peer-reviewed articles. The peer-reviewed study or the peer-reviewed article is like the gold standard for the lit review. That's what you want to be looking at. You can include books, information from books, but I would do so sparingly. You can include information from websites, but only in the sense that you're using it for reference. Like if you need to include statistics from a government website or something, that's fine, but you're not actually reviewing material on websites. And you're not reviewing articles that are not peer reviewed, like editorials or things like that. So it's real important that you qualify your search that way, that you only want material to come back to you that's peer reviewed. And that's the material that you should include in the lit review. Now I'm going to pull up a page here. Okay. This is one of the, what I use for, searching for articles and just research. This is St. Pete College. It's in Florida. It's an example of an academic library. You'll have access to whatever school you're at. You should have access to their library and their online, library system. So the interface may look a little different. There may be similar features, but generally they should have things, for advanced search, databases. Here's a journal search. Right, here's book an appointment if you need, or ask a librarian. And there are reference librarians, and it's their job to, part of their job to help students, navigate this, to help them search, to help them refine their search. That's part of their jobs, so don't feel weird or bad about asking, a reference librarian for help. In fact, they expect it because, and your professors expect it too if you're not real sure what you're doing, because it's somebody that can help you and guide you along in the process. Here's the general search bar, right? You can do a general search if we just wanted to look for, let's say, transformational leadership, in education. That's real general, right? You're going to get a ton of stuff back. You can do it this way, the advanced search, right, where it has certain fields. You can search just the title, you can search by author, you can search by subject, or just any field. So this would be transformational leadership in any part of the document. Other kind of qualifying features for the search, just give me articles back, right? Here's the language, only in English, and here's the date. I don't worry about the day and month too much, but if we only could go 5 years back, right, you would want to limit it to 2017 to 2022. Let's just say you wanted to, and this is a very general kind of introduction. Again, if you want to get kind of more specific and get more kind of detailed help, again, you would ask the reference librarian to help you. Transformational leadership and education and let's just say emotional intelligence. And it's going to qualify it by what the things and here's your peer-reviewed option, right? And this is a way, I mean, chairs sometimes want you to confirm that things are peer-reviewed. If you click this from the beginning, I mean, it's only going to give you peer-reviewed material back. So that's a pretty good way to ensure that what you're searching for is peer-reviewed. And look, let's just, and this one, right? The first one that comes up, and see, they all are, and it indicates it's right here, peer-reviewed, right? So if if your chair, asks you I mean, this is the way how you can confirm it. Okay, and obviously you click on each one for each additional, for each article. Okay, that's just databases, different databases. I mentioned ERIC before. There it is, and it has its own kind of search interface. But this would be if you're really targeting education. Okay, and that's the search bar for ERIC. But some things like, let's go back here, like academic search complete is as popular. This is one that will, like ERIC would be included in this search. This searches a lot of different databases. So things like this are really good places to start if you don't have kind of a specific database in mind. Okay, or even just the general, place we were at before. Okay, where was I? Here. Okay. Even the search bar is good. That's the simple search, but the advanced search, right? And you can add as many items as you want to kind of narrow things down. Okay, so that's just a real general kind of introduction to the academic search. Again, use your resources, which include your librarians. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that for now. Okay, and that's the literature search strategy section. How long, page, maybe a couple of solid paragraphs. Just make sure you have, the required components, and your template may also give you some additional details that they're looking for. The theoretical framework is usually next. Again, check your school's template. Sometimes the theoretical framework appears in chapter 1 and in chapter 2, with a further elaboration on it in chapter 2. Sometimes it only appears in chapter 1. Sometimes it only appears in chapter 2. So that's why you need to know what your school is looking for. And so the first, well, let me get to this one later. There's a question about what's the difference between a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework. I take a really practical approach to it, which is theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies. Conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies. And that should be enough, for your purposes. So what does the section look like? What's required in the section? I mean, always, check your school's template, but generally, you want to start off by something very simple, simple declarative statement, something like, Goleman's theory of emotional intelligence will serve as a theoretical foundation or the theoretical framework for this study. Right, talk about the theory, just mention the theory that you're going to use, with a source, with usually the person who developed it, or somebody who kind of extended it. The year, you want to define the theory, right? Because sometimes people will start talking about things related to the theory, but not stop and define it. Define the theory, and talk a little bit about what the person who developed it to do. And theories explain things. That's what they do. So what did the person develop it to explain? Right. Okay. Like I said, define the theory along with any associated components. Theories sometimes have components, and if they're important to your study, you need to mention those components. You need to define them as you're going to be using them for your theory. For your study. Discuss what other researchers have used the theory for. The last point's important. It's like, how does it connect to your study? How does it inform what you're doing? How does it undergird, what you're looking at? How's it going to help you explain what you're doing? How does it connect to your study? Another question: how many theories do you need? I see people like pile on theories, and then there's this theory and this theory and number 5 theory, and it's like, time out, stop. You only need as many as you need. I know that's a kind of a circular answer, but if you need one theory, my sense is the theory should be well suited for your study. If you have one well suited theory, that's all you need. If you need 2, that's fine. But you don't need more theories just to have theories, because that gets complicated and it makes more work for you. You have to define all the theories, talk about them. You have to talk about how they connect to your study. You have to potentially talk about them in chapter 5 when you talk about your results. So one well-suited theory, again, 2 if you need it, and more as needed, but usually you need more usually, but you could. So let's just take an example. Let's say you're doing a study, you're conducting a study, and you're looking at connections between whether the components of transformational leadership are connected to the components of emotional intelligence. Like a correlational study, right? So you would need, your theoretical framework would consist of those 2 theories, right? Emotional intelligence and transformational leadership. So those 2 theories would comprise your theoretical framework. Okay, so you would do for each one what we listed here in the tabs. And a real important point that people sometimes miss: if you're conducting a quantitative study, like I said, on emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, you're using a certain survey instrument, right? All the surveys, all the instruments have theoretical foundations. They all do, because they just don't come up with these questions from nowhere. Somewhere there's a theoretical foundation. So if you're using a Goleman's survey for emotional intelligence, to measure emotional intelligence, you want to use Goleman's theory, right? Because there are going to be several instruments to measure emotional intelligence. There's going to be Goleman's, there's going to be Smith's, there's going to be Jones, right? So whoever's instrument you use, you want to use that person's theory, because it might be a little different than somebody else's theory, right? So you don't want to use Goleman's survey, but use Jones's theory. Okay, if you use Goleman's survey, use Goleman's theory. So make sure those match up. Same goes for transformational leadership, right? In this example. For conceptual frameworks, it's really similar. It's just that sometimes, because qualitative studies tend to be more exploratory, you're seeking information that's more in depth. You're exploring an issue that we don't really have answers to yet. Or you're getting people's insights. Sometimes you just need you use your major concepts and build a framework from those. Use research ground, your major concepts grounded in the research, right? So somebody's take on, whatever concept it is you're using, and their take or their theory of it should correspond to what you're trying to find out. And so it works similar to the theoretical framework in that sense. You explain the concepts, you source the material with the person you're getting the ideas from about the concept, and build your framework, talk about how it relates to your study. A little bit of a difference with the conceptual framework for qualitative studies is they help guide your interview questions, because your interview questions, you just can't ask things that you want to ask, right? Or just come from thin air. So your framework helps guide, will give you these concepts and directions that will help guide your interview questions when you sit down to write those. How long does the theoretical framework section need to be? Several pages. Again, it's, every study is different, theories are different. But probably, a couple pages to several pages. And again, you've heard me say it, check your template, but also for everything in the dissertation, really, because you haven't done it before. It's always a good idea to get a good example or two from your school in a similar area, maybe that your chair, has chaired before. But get an example so you can see how people have handled some of these sections. Sometimes it's you go to webinars, you use your resources, but there's just no sometimes there's no substitute for a good example. Okay, the review of the literature. This is the main part of, and this is where everything is unique to your study, right? Because all studies are different. The research you're looking at is going to be different. So these will all be, unique. But this is the bulk of the chapter. So when you have all this research, there's a couple of things that become challenging. And one of them is organization, right? Because it's going to be real easy to get lost in all this research. How do I organize it? Oh my God, where do I start? Well, just think about, go back to chapter 1, think about what you're studying. What are your factors? What are your variables? If it's qual, what are your major concepts? I mean, that guides your organization right there. It's easy because there's a lot of material to go down kind of rabbit holes. Well, this seems connected. It's probably important. I should include it. Well, if there's a lot of things that are going to be connected, but if it's not what you're studying, it's probably doesn't belong, right? So stay focused on your, like I said, your factors, your variables, your major concepts, what it is you're doing. And so these things should act as the organizational signposts throughout the chapter, right? Or the headers, right? Or the subheaders. So under review of the literature, you're going to have topical subheaders that are based on your, like I said, your factors, your major concepts. Okay, so use headers to organize material into sections. You can even have subsections, right? If you need to kind of split it even more finely. Because let's say you are studying emotional intelligence, you have a section on that where you introduce emotional intelligence, the concept, then you start reviewing literature on emotional intelligence. Then certain things emerge that trends in the literature, right, in the last 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, whatever it is. Then you might want to make subheaders based on those, those trends. And you can't really know what those are until you get into it and start seeing what's in the literature. But that's why all these things are different. Okay, so, and headers are good because they're reader friendly and they're writer friendly. The reader friendly for obvious reasons. I mean, there's nothing more intimidating than seeing just, blocks of uninterrupted text, right? Without headers, it's really difficult for readers to digest. Same from a writer's perspective. If it makes it easier if you can chunk things out, right? Chunk things out by section. And take it section at a time. It makes it easier than just one massive lump of 20 pages of text. Okay, and the review of the literature, it's not just a summary of studies, right? If it were a summary of studies, then you could get away with an annotated bibliography, which is basically a summary of studies. There is some summary in it, all right? So part of what you're doing, you're going to have to summarize the studies to some degree, right? But it doesn't stop there. You also have to include synthesis and analysis, and we'll go over that in a minute. And what is synthesis? Synthesis is basically just putting different things together, right? The combination of parts to form a whole. So you combine information from studies to make your points. Okay, if you have a point about emotional intelligence, as it pertains to principles, make the point that seems to be that the literature seems to be showing, and support the point you're making with information from the studies, right? And you want to synthesize, you want to start thinking about organization really kind of at the small levels, like the paragraph level. Synthesize at the paragraph level and use standard paragraph organization strategy, right? So what does that mean? This goes back to, I don't know, middle school, right? Where we learned how to write, cohesive paragraphs. And this helps us in this situation in the lit review because we have so much information. It's like if you just remember the fundamentals, it'll help you a lot. You have a topic sentence. Then you have evidence or discussion or illustration of the topic in the material that comes after. And then you have a summary sentence that summarizes the ideas or transitions to the next paragraph. It seems that when sometimes folks are writing the lit review, they get they're all awash in information and research, and they kind of forget about the, the fundamental, way to organize information that we learned early on. But kind of go back to that, because that'll be a good kind of touchstone for organization. I'm going to give you an example here. Oops, there. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but I'll pull out some highlighted bits. And so I have the paragraph broken down and color coded. So the yellow indicates the topic sentence. Right, research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. The green material, which goes from the start of the green to the end of the green, that's the material that's discussing the topic or supporting the topic or illustrating the topic. Then you have the summary paragraph in teal, the summary sentence in teal. Empirical evidence from research largely supports that diabetic health literacy is a vital component of patients' self-efficacy, diabetic control, and clinical outcomes. It's the kind of summary sentence, right? And then I'll leave it up for a minute. You can kind of read the in-between material, but that's a good, it's a well organized paragraph with a clear topic, clear discussion or illustration of the topic, and a clear ending for it. And that's what professors like to see. Then you move on to the next point, right? And this would be in a larger section on whatever the topic is with the subheader. And see how you're bringing in information from different studies together, the synthesis. But I also want to show you some analysis too. You don't need to analyze like everything, but when you can make judgments or evaluations or analysis, go ahead and do that. So if you notice there's a qualifying word in the first sentence, research has mostly shown, right? Because all the examples do show that except the last one. if you go down to where it says, unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips, this is about 4 sentences up from the bottom. Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control. So there's one that disagrees with the other ones, right? So that's why I said mostly in the opening sentence. And here's where the analysis comes in. It's just a little bit, but it says which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So that helps kind of explain why their findings may be different than the others. And it's a little bit of analysis in the sense that it, you know, it points to a limitation in their study. Okay, and then the last sentence has another qualifier, which says empirical evidence from recent research largely supports. Okay, again, that largely means that it doesn't all, it mostly does, which kind of aligns with the way I organized the paragraph, which is that most of the research does, except this other one, which there's a reason that it may not agree. So that's an example of synthesis and the kind of stuff your professors are looking for. If you also notice a little bit of summary in here, where you say a little bit about the studies, conducted a systematic review, so-and-so reviewed 115 recent studies on the relationship. So you give details of the study too, but you're not just sitting there giving a solid summary, but you throw in important details about the study. Okay. Analysis. Okay, we talked a little bit about this. Analysis of the research involves noting shortcomings or gaps of the studies, right? You also want to note trends in the research. If you see things kind of recurring and things that are kind of hot now or things that people are focusing on, you want to note that. And where appropriate, you want to try to connect material to your study, right? Because the purpose of the chapter 2, and I realize now I didn't say this at the beginning, the purpose of the chapter 2 is not just to kind of cover the research, on your topic that's been done before. I mean, yes, you're doing that, but why are you doing it, right? I mean, you have to think about that. Like, okay, well, because the template says so, my professor wants me to, but why? The purpose is, yeah, to cover it, to see what's been done, but you also want to see it's overall, it's accumulating into an argument for doing your study, for your research problem, right? This is everything that's been done on the topic, but this hasn't been covered. And this would be, what you're doing in your study. So it helps make a case for conducting your study. It helps make a case for the research problem, right? Researchers focused on this, and this, but they haven't focused on this other thing, or they haven't focused on it in the way that I'm going to. So that's the larger purpose that you should keep in mind with the lit review, is that you're basically making an argument for your research problem and for why your study is needed. So where you can, you want to reiterate any connections of the studies to your study. You want to reiterate that there's a gap, or that shows a need for your study. You want to reiterate that anytime that the research highlights where your study would be able to come in and add that information. And again, like I said, it culminates in a largely in an argument for conducting your study for the research problem. Okay, and we're to the summary, and I know that there's a lot in between that, the review of the literature and the summary, but those are kind of the general ways of looking at it that you want to think about. And again, can't say it enough. Use your template, use your resources, use examples. But the summary, like any other summary, you just recap major points from the chapter, which would be, in this case, you're recapping some of the major trends in a broad, real broad strokes, because it's a summary, some of the major trends and some of the major points in the research. You also want to remind the reader of what's not in the research at this point. Remind them of your research problem, and why it's important and necessary to conduct your study. And that's it. That's all I have for that. I'll be happy to answer questions in a second. Yeah, this is who we are. This is a little bit about what we do, and our contact information, obviously. So if you think you want to talk to somebody about our services, and if that's right for you, feel free to reach out. And I'll leave that up for now. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the question and answer box or even the chat box. No questions? Everybody's good with the chapter 2? I'll give you a couple minutes if you're still typing, but will we get a copy of the recording or presentation? Yes, you will. And that's, if you scroll up in the chat box, that's been addressed. A copy of the webinar will be sent out 24 to 48 hours after the webinar. Yep. And they're also archived on our website, and Sierra has also provided that information. If you just scroll up in the chat box, you'll see it. Yep. Thank you, Sierra. Should all be, can you repost it? It should all be there. But Sierra, I can repost that. But you just scroll up. Yep. Oh, I joined late. Okay. Yep. Sierra will do that for you. Okay. Any other questions? No questions about the content? Okay, here's the question. It's not so much a question as a statement, but my chair requested I change from theoretical to phenomenological. Okay. Okay, do you have a question associated with that? What's the difference and why? I don't know why you're and I don't really understand. Theoretical is not a design. Theoretical is means pertaining to theory. Phenomenological is a qualitative design. It's a specific kind of qualitative type of study, which focuses on, and I'm not a methodologist, so we have to take, phenomenology is, it examines a phenomenon in depth qualitatively, and theoretical is, if you're just staying at the level of theory, if you're discussing something in a theoretical capacity. So my sense would be that she suggested phenomenological because it's an actual design. Theoretical, I don't see. I mean, advanced researchers conduct theoretical studies, but they're not really studies, they're more of discussions of theory. So I think that's probably why your chair steered you away from that, because it's not an actual design. Okay. Did your chair advise you to change from a case study design to a phenomenological? Was it from a case study? Okay. I would just do what your chair says, but because I don't know your study. But a case study design is also another kind of typically qualitative, or it could have quantitative components. Yeah, a case study is something that it's a kind of study design that involves multiple data sources. So let's say you're conducting a case study at a school on teachers or grades or something. You might interview teachers. You might observe them in the classroom. One data source, two data sources. You might also look at like course syllabi and course assignments. So that would be a case study where you get a more comprehensive view of something by using multiple data sources, which is different from phenomenological, where you would just interview people. So I'm sure what your chair suggested has something to do with what the information you're trying to get in your topic, but without knowing that, I don't know why, but it's always a good idea to, unless you have strong feelings or strong reason not to, it's always a good idea to go with what your chair suggests. And some chairs are open to, you can talk to them if you feel that something else is more appropriate. Okay. Any other questions? No? Everybody's good with the chapter 2? Okay. All right, good. Well, I'm going to wish everybody luck. The dissertation, it just takes perseverance, let me say that. But use your resources. Remember, for the chapter 2, use your reference librarians. The link is on there several times, I believe. Okay, everybody. All right, thank you for coming. And we do offer other webinars on different topics, on different chapters. So check our website and see what we're offering when. And okay, well, good luck, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.